Good evening, members, and welcome to the Democracy Committee of this evening. Before we get to the agenda, may I take this opportunity to advise you that we are not expecting the fire alarm to sound tonight, so if it does, please remain seated and Mrs Snook will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building, if appropriate. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone is intending recording these proceedings, can you please let me know now? Okay. I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and other members of the public in the room know that this is taking place. We have apologies this evening from Councillor Borton, or Boughton. Borton, okay, thank you, and Hemsley, Councillor Hemsley and Councillor Mrs Ring, with substitute members being Councillor Mrs Blackmore, Councillor Berry and Councillor Prendergast. Thank you. Do we have any visiting members?
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I would like to speak to agenda item 11 and fairly briefly agenda item 12.
That's item 11, that's Councillor English, item 11 and item 12. That's noted. Thank you. Do we have any disclosures by members and officers? None? Thank you. Disclosures of lobbying? None? To consider whether any items are. Good point, actually. I think you should declare that. Yes, okay. Can you make a note of that, Debbie, please?
Sorry, if we're doing disclosures, perhaps I should also say that I sit on the Planning Committee.
I don't.
Membership of other council committees is not in any sense a declarable interest.
Councillor Hinder, please.
I was going to ask Mr Harris.
I don't actually think it's a matter that you need to disclose in respect of this item, because remember, the specific item is about forming a working group.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. To consider whether any items should be taken in private because of possible disclosure of exempt information. Don't consider we have any those sort of problems at the moment or discussions. And we're now into the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of March 2017. Councillor Prendergast.
I can speak with some confidence here because I was present at that meeting in March. Actually, the minutes are correct, but some of the things that it says it will bring forward to this July meeting are missing from the agenda. And I just wanted to raise those in case they got mislaid or lost.
Okay, can you continue?
Okay, on page 3, with regard to the 6-month rule, it says, in the light of this misunderstanding, the interim deputy head of legal partnership would bring a report to the next meeting of the committee in July 2017 in order that the issue can be discussed again. So that's one. And then on page 4, it says the committee also asked that the following issues could be taken into account. And again, it says the committee noted that the suggestions would form part of a full report to the committee in July. Well, these items are not all included in this evening's agenda.
Can you answer that? Okay.
So, in respect of the report of the interim deputy head of legal partnership, obviously that hasn't come forward to this meeting, and I will ask that that is brought forward to the meeting in September.
Thank you. Item 12 on the agenda is supposed to deal with the majority of those items. So perhaps when we get to item 12, we can pick up the things where I need to go away and take that forward, if that's okay. Thank you.
So are you happy with that? Okay, thank you very much. So are all the minutes agreed, or are there any further comments on it? Agreed? Okay, thank you very much. Now on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of March 2017, and I trust... Sorry? Oh, sorry, 23rd of May. Right, 23rd of May. Are the minutes agreed as a correct record? Agreed? Thank you. I can leave this on. Questions and statements from members of the public. There are no questions or statements, obviously. Right, we're going on to now report of the interim Deputy Head of Legal Partnership, Robin Harris. His recommendation on page 6, appointment of independent person. Hand over to Robin. Thank you.
So, thank you, Chairman. Just to be clear, so the report is being brought forward by Estelle Callaghan, the Interim Head of Legal Partnership and Monitoring Officer, and I am presenting it on her behalf this evening. The report makes the recommendation on page 6 that this committee recommends to Council that the term for the current appointed independent person be extended for 3 years until the 31st of July 2020. The Localism Act 2011 places a duty on the Council
Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to just raise a point. In future, would it not be wise to advertise such an important position that comes up at the end of this month? And, you know, here we are 3 weeks prior to that date and we're talking about it at this committee. Would it not be wise in future to advertise this post much earlier? I know it says in the report that the last time we only got one applicant, but if we gave it 3 months or 6 months, we might get a better response.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the issue here, in actual fact, is that although the agenda item is described as appointment of an independent person, it is in fact actually in relation to the extension of the existing independent person. Therefore, there is no intention to advertise the post, only an intention to extend, and therefore this is done in a timely fashion because the recommendation to Council would then be effective on the 19th of July 2017.
Councillor Blackmore, you want to speak?
I just have one quick question. Does Mrs Varney, I'm assuming she has been asked if she'd like to continue for the forthcoming period, because it's all very well us saying, oh yes, this is fine, but has she actually been approached and is she in agreement?
Yeah.
Councillor Prendergast.
Mr. Harris, I don't wish to be difficult. I'm just seeking some clarification because in the introduction and background at paragraph 2.5 it says quite clearly the current term of office expires on the 31st of July 2017.
I'm not sure that we're in disagreement, Councillor. That is correct. And so the recommendation of this report is that the existing candidate is offered an extension, which is entirely legitimate because there is no fixed period of time under the Localism Act under which a person can be appointed, and therefore, subject to the recommendation of this committee going to full council on the 19th of July, then the council will meet its statutory obligation and have a person in post seamlessly without there being any issue with them not having that post filled.
Are you happy with that answer, Councillor Prendergast? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I was actually going to introduce the report, but I think that probably the key features have been dealt with in relation to answering those questions. So I'm not sure there's a great deal of value in airing them further.
Are all members happy with that? You are. Okay, then we'll accept that. Right, I'm happy to propose the recommendation to. Sorry. Oh, Councillor Batmore.
I was just going to say, Chair, I'd be happy to second it if you propose it.
Oh, you beat me to it. I was just going to propose it and then. Okay. Well, I'm going to read it. The recommendation is to recommend to Council that the term of the current appointed independent person be extended for 3 years until the 31st of July 2020. Seconded by Councillor Blackmore. Thank you very much. So that is agreed. Agreed. Thank you. Right, the next item is report of the Head of Policy and Communications and Governance Planning Referral Process Review. And I'd like to ask Angela Woodhouse to read her report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. As explained in the report, following the recent activation of the Planning Referrals Committee, group leaders have requested that this committee review the arrangements for managing risk in relation to planning committee decisions. The committee is asked to appoint a 5-member working group and agree the terms of reference as set out in the report. However, I would like to stress it's your working group, so it's up to you who you put on it and how many members, and again the terms of reference are yours, as is the time frame, so that's up for you for discussion.
Yeah. Councillor English, would you like to have your say on this one? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I felt it was important to come along this evening because there are, I think, some misapprehensions and myths about how the current Planning Referrals Committee was established. It came about after a very acrimonious, and I mean very acrimonious, debate in full council, following a proposal which had come from the leadership, the then leader and senior members of the council, and the chief executive to actually have planning applications that were, in their view, the wrong ones, decided by full council. And instead, this proposal was actually agreed by full council. However, it has not been brought, it was not brought forward in the way that many of the members of that council debate intended it to be. To give a little bit of further background, when we, under the pre-cabinet and scrutiny committee system, there was a 2-stage planning process. We had, rather similarly to we have now, a development control committee and a planning and transportation committee. And any 3 members of the council planning committee could refer planning applications that they strongly disagreed with to Planning and Transportation Committee. This acted quite well as a check and balance on unwise decisions in either direction. I'm not suggesting that we need to necessarily replicate the process, but there is quite clearly a lot wrong in many ways with the current system, not least, whilst I'm not saying that officers should not be able to refer things for a second review, I do think it is highly inappropriate in a local authority model that the chairman, vice chairman and members of the planning committee cannot refer anything themselves. And it is only officers who can do so, and in a very limited set of circumstances. If we were setting out to write a set of rules that singled out a particular facet of risk management of the planning process, it magnified it perhaps beyond its appropriate scale, and set out to create a system that was almost bound not to provide the appropriate review mechanism, this would be a very good way to have done it. So I think the recommendation on the papers is a very good one. There is a need for a root and branch reform of the current system, not abolishing it entirely, because I think there is a very, very serious need for some form of check on every committee of the council, whether it's a service committee or a planning committee, but it needs major concern. And in that respect, I think the working group, when they're appointed, need to think very seriously about recommendation C in the terms of reference. I'm not saying that it is not important to manage and reduce risk in relation to planning committee decisions. I think it's very important. But I think there is a risk, shall we say, that the terms of reference as currently constituted are going to bring us to replicate what we've just done. And so we need to be thinking about not getting rid of that clause entirely, but expanding it to say that whatever process comes in is there not just to manage and reduce risk, but to review decisions and to seek the best available outcome for the council and the public, or something along those lines. I wouldn't want to tell the working group how specifically to write their terms of reference, but I think we need to broaden that out so that we're actually talking about ensuring quality decisions are made, and not just in terms of risk management. It may be we make an appalling decision at planning committee in another respect that is completely, I don't know, undermines a key policy of the council. Say it could happen. And at the moment, we've got no way of reversing that unless it causes a major financial problem. So I think we've got to be very, very careful about how we actually take this forward, because this working group could have a very, very positive outcome, and I think it should, but what we don't want to do is hamstring it by terms of reference that make sure it's focusing on only, albeit an important part of the consideration. Thank you very much for listening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Thank you very much, Councillor English, and those things I take on board. And I think the general view of the suggestion for the working party really is to look at all aspects of, whether we go one way, whether we go another, whether we leave it alone. Those views are taken on board. I know Councillor Spring came into the meeting as a visiting member. Councillor Spring, would you like to speak at the present time?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apologies for being late. I'm afraid just trying to be in.
Can I just, new as I am to this, this is at the discretion of the committee, not myself. So are you all agreed that's acceptable? Okay, thank you very much. Continue.
Thank you. I'm sorry trying to be in two places at one time, so I do apologise for being late. Thank you for letting me speak. When the Planning Referrals Committee was called on Woodcut Farm, it was the first time I'd seen that happen. And the reaction I got from residents in my ward was quite angry. It was a real distrust And I don't think it is seen well in the eyes of the public that 3 people can overrule a decision of 13. And also, when I attended, I felt it was tremendous pressure on the 3 members of that committee, and I thought it was a very unfair pressure on them. So it felt wrong, totally felt wrong. I hear what Councillor English is saying. I think he made some very, very good points. My thoughts were a decision like that should be referred to full council, but it's interesting that Councillor English said it went from full council to a planning referrals committee, so it obviously does need discussing. But I just think whatever the outcome, it needs to be a process that in the eyes of the public is open and fair, and that you don't have a smaller committee overriding a bigger one. If anything, it needs to be a bigger committee overriding a smaller one. But that would be the comments I'd like to make. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Springer. Can I throw this open to the floor? Because Councillor Hinder.
Thank you, Chairman. As someone who sat on this committee, I totally uphold both what Clive and Val has said. The pressure that we were under was absolutely tremendous. It wasn't only that. I got vitriolic emails from parish councillors, which was totally out of order. They were questioning the ability of us as councillors. I find that very, very upsetting that we were absolutely put under that pressure. And I also find it extremely wrong that democratically elected councillors can sit on a planning committee and make the same decision twice by a committee, and it's then referred to, as Councillor Springett said, a smaller committee to override that decision. It is totally and utterly wrong. I welcome this working group because it is really needed. It's been needed since the previous referrals that we sat on. So yes, I do welcome it, but I think I want to make it perfectly plain the actual pressure on people to have that people sitting there and being nasty and vitriolic and questioning the ability of councillors is totally out of order. And no councillor should have to go through that again, not 3 councillors. So yes, I do welcome it, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chairman, members. Well, first of all, I don't want to preempt what a working group will discuss, because they're the ones who are going into the detail. So, but I do agree with the idea of setting up a working group. I think it's absolutely essential, and I endorse what Councillor Hinder said, and also both Clive and Val's statements, because I think I was there that evening, and it was. To witness it was a pretty unpleasant experience, actually, in my own personal view. I don't think councillors should ever have been put in that position. I also think that the way it was interpreted, I know this sounds a bit of a criticism, but it was such an awful event, I think, that I am going to say it. I think the way people interpret that the role of the Planning Referrals Committee was rather wrong, because the reason for sending something to a Planning Referrals Committee was because of the financial implications. But the Planning Committee knew those already. So this wasn't something new. It was already known. And I think the actual decision interpretation of that decision, rule was wrong. And I will say that. But it was a pretty upsetting experience. I think the terms of reference that are on page 12, A and B are absolutely right, and I think that exactly. I think we should be looking at other councils' arrangements and models. I think it should be the first thing this working group does. Improvements to the current arrangement, yes, of course, that's a given, so that's fine. C, I didn't quite understand really. It's a rather convoluted way of saying, I think, do we need a backstop committee or not? Because that's the way of reducing risk. I don't quite know why the Planning Committee is an independent committee. It makes its decisions. It comes to those decisions. I mean, I've always been pressed on me all the time that the Planning Committee stands on its own. He looks at each individual case in its own right, and we must never be predetermined. I've been removed from this room twice because I've been predetermined, against my better judgment, I say, on both occasions, but I wasn't prepared to take the chance. I think this C's we need to think about a bit, but A and B certainly are right. And I totally support setting up a working group. Whether it's 5 persons, I don't know where 5 came into the discussion, but 5-member working group. But I wouldn't die in a ditch on that one. 5 seems a reasonable figure to me. But I think it's so important that we review this and decide whether we actually need one or not. Maybe we do. But I think a lot depends on what I'd like to see what other councils do on this. And I think Councillor Springett talked about referring back to the full council, which might be an option. But I don't want to come to any decision tonight. This is something I think the working groups will probably come up with. All right? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. I'm going to ask Mrs Woodhouse to come in on comment on that before I go to Councillor Batmore.
Yeah, C was in there really, what I was thinking about when I put that in there. So if it's not right, we can change it or take it out. I was thinking more about things like report writing. So the information that goes into reports or how they're presented is another way you can look at how you manage risk. So you could have more information on cost implications of the decision. I mean, there's information already in there. I'm not suggesting there isn't enough, but you might want to look at different approaches. That was the kind of thing I was thinking. But if that's not right, we can change it. But that's where I was coming from, just to give you a bit more explanation.
Councillor Batmore.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to look at this in a different way, because I think everyone's focusing on the last Planning Referrals Committee, and I don't think we should be doing that. I think we should be looking at the principle of, do we have planning referrals or don't we? What's happened in the past is the past, it's history, it should just be left there. And I think if emotion is allowed to take over, then this goes in the wrong direction. I am a little bit concerned when it says to appoint a 5-member working group, because I'd like to know how you're going to do that. My concern is if you have it, and this is just an example, if you have it as the 5 group leaders, there is the possibility that you could have 3 people who only represent a small number of councillors having as much influence as the other 2, and I'm a bit concerned that it's not politically balanced. So maybe if we're looking at a 5-member working group, that needs to say it ought to be politically balanced. Otherwise, I'm just concerned that we could get ourselves into a little bit of a pickle, or there's issues over bias. Frankly, A, B and C, I think, work. Always interesting to know what other councils do, so we can look at best practice. And also, where people have had controversial applications or controversial decisions, how do they handle them? I'm not saying it should be behind closed doors, but I think, could it be better if maybe it happens in public, but maybe the public are not necessarily in the same room, but it's being relayed via a link to a different room? Maybe that would take a little bit of the heat out of the situation. It's just a thought. Where we've got improvements to the current arrangements, I think we should be looking at options to the current arrangements. What else is out there? How else can we do it? Because I'm not wholly convinced you can improve on it, because it's always going to be the sensitive subjects. So I don't think you can make improvements. I think we just need to look at what else is available. Interestingly, if you have the matter referred back to full council, then you're going to have members who are effectively voting twice on something, voting when they were on the planning committee, then when it goes to full council, and that seems a bit strange to me. I wonder if anyone who sits on planning referrals could be a member that has not been involved in the original decision when it was made, regardless of whether they're on the planning committee or not. As long as they haven't been involved in that original decision, then surely they are impartial. So I think one works as long as you can get some sort of balance. And I'm quite happy with recommendation 2 as well, as long as you include the options rather than actually saying improvement, because I'm not convinced. If we link ourselves to improvement, we may end up doing nothing. And I'm not convinced that's the right thing. So I think we need to look at options. Please.
I'll go to Councillor Prendergast and then Councillor Perry, and then we'll come back to that one, if you're okay with that. Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you. Our visiting members have made some really, really good points this evening, and members sitting either side of me have made some good points. It's no secret that my views on the planning referrals committee are well documented. You know, it completely undermines the democratic process as far as I'm concerned. We've got a 13-man planning committee, and then we have a planning referrals committee. It doesn't make sense. There are cost implications attached to other committees and decisions that are made in this council. They're not checked in the same way. So I do feel quite strongly about that. But what I really wanted to come back to was some understanding, and I hope this will be debated, on how we form this working group. How is it going to be made up? Who is it going to be? Because if, as Councillor Blackmore said, if it's the group leaders, well, then there are issues there. Who decides who these members are? I'm just curious.
Right. Before I go to Councillor Perry, I'm going to pass this back to Mrs Woodhouse.
It's your choice. So in terms of how you, so you weren't around for scrutiny, but you could cast your mind back to scrutiny working groups and how we did those. So it's really up to the committee. So this committee could say those 5 members are drawn from this committee, so you could ask for volunteers. You could say we want it to be politically balanced, as Councillor Mrs Blackmore said, in which case you would go to the group leaders and ask them to put forward nominations. You could say you wanted, for example, planning committee members involved, but it's totally up to you how you form the group, and including the number. So I've said 5 because that, for me, is a manageable number of people to work with on a working group, in my experience. And I quite like an odd number because it helps when you're voting and working things through. And I have chaired, but it's a working group and it's up to you who's on it. So the outside bodies working group, for example, the whole committee are invited because everyone was interested in, and then we meet with those who can attend. And it's totally up to you how you approach it. What I would say of political balance is you'd be looking at 2, 2 and 1. So you'd be looking at Conservatives 2, Lib Dem 2, and then the one remainder would have to be fought between the 3. So you'd have to have a conversation between those 3 groups, so who'd like to be on it. So that might make it a bit tricky. And I don't know that making it much bigger would help, because you have to make it really big to get everyone on it, as we found with things like policy and resources. Yes, exactly, Councillor Mrs Blackmore. So it really is up to this committee to decide. I mean, I envisaged you'd probably want to put 5 people who are interested from the group on it rather than thinking about political balance. But if you wanted to do political balance, we could. And that's something for you to decide, and we'll take to group leaders. But it's a choice.
Thank you for that. Councillor Perry.
Thank you. Yeah, just to go back earlier a bit, I mean, there are emotional issues here, and I'm not ashamed to say it. And quite frankly, but we need to look ahead. I don't care a damn about the political balance, actually, quite frankly. I want to get this sorted. And I don't think political balance makes scrap the difference on this particular issue. And I'm going to say that. Now, coming back to what's just been suggested, I'm just looking around this committee. There's 9 of us. So 5 out of 9 is almost this committee. And quite frankly, and honestly, you read this paper carefully, you'll see that it's nothing to do with the group lead. The group leaders have referred this to the Democracy Committee. So, and are you really saying the Democracy Committee then refers it back to the group leaders of the working group? I'm sorry, that is ridiculous. So let's get this sorted now. In my view, I would suggest it's this committee, and it's those who are interested in this committee who carry on with it. As for the improvements or options, I actually think I'm looking for improvements, actually. So I'm not so impressed with the options argument. I can see where you can. I think it's both. But actually, you're going to look at other options, but you want the improvements to the system. So I'm not going to die in a ditch on the wording, but I would certainly want improvements in there, because that's what I'm looking for. And an improvement might be doing away with it altogether. We might say that isn't it. There's a but I'm not saying we should do that, but I'm saying that would be, might be a decision. Yeah. So that's where I would come from on that. So I would say keep it to this committee, and then you can, You can keep the whole committee if you want, and those who are interested will come to the meetings. That's what I would do. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And does the Lib Dem side have some views on this, please?
Sorry. I do actually agree with what John has said. I do second that, actually, and I think it should be between it's come to the democracy group, so it should be down to the democracy group to make a working group together.
Are we happy with that suggestion? Can we take a vote on that suggestion, that everybody from this committee is involved with that committee? Do we have a seconder for...
I'm proposing that we keep it within this democracy committee and form a working group from it.
And that was proposed by Councillor Fissenden and seconded by Councillor Perry. Can we take a vote on that? Those in favour? Unanimously. So we consider then that you are going to form the committee that is going to look at the planning referrals issues into the future.
Chairman, may I ask one question? It does say there will be a report back. Should that have a time frame on it, just so that you've got something to aim towards or work towards? Otherwise, I'm just concerned it might drift into the future. And the other thing is, I'm assuming that the current planning referral system stays in place until a new son of appears.
Thank you. Councillor, Mrs Woodhouse.
Well, I don't think you're going to be ready by next meeting. I wouldn't suggest this September. Is there a meeting in December? Does that seem realistic? Or November? I don't know when your next meetings are. Yeah? So if we aim for December as your time frame, we can put that in your terms of reference.
So, are we happy with that time frame? Sorry? Yeah. Can we clarify? Sorry?
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I just clarify, are we going to do the 5 members or is it going to be the whole committee? Because obviously there are substitutes here.
It's the whole committee.
The whole committee? Yep,
Yes.
fine. Yep.
Okay? Yep. Happy with that? Councillor Vizard.
Mr Chairman, as was rightly pointed out, it's got to be the whole committee as stands, and with its permanent members. But obviously we need to get some dates in the diary so that we can get on with this. If we're going to refer back in December, we need to have some dates circulated to deal with this specific item.
Very much. Can you do that? Thank you. So we're agreed on that point. Points of reference there. Great. Okay, thank you very much indeed.
If it may assist members, but I've just been noting what people were suggesting in respect of the terms of reference, what appears to be the feeling around the room. So 2.1b amended to read options for and or improvements to the current arrangements. Yeah. And 2.2 to be amended so that it finishes findings and recommendations, so to report back to the Democracy Committee with the findings and recommendations for the December committee. Propose and second that and act on it.
Can I propose that those terms of reference are acceptable? Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry, Councillor Vizard.
Mr. Chairman, I think there actually needs to be a wider remit, as was suggested by yourself on option C. It needs to be just open for discussion as opposed to being tight as the way it is there.
Yeah. So if I could make a suggestion then in relation to the wording that C then reads any other way to manage and reduce risk in relation to planning committee decisions.
Does the committee find that an acceptable? Yep. Everybody happy with that comment? Okay, thank you. So we'll include that on there then. Right. Can we, just to clarify that 2.1 is, and, sorry.
I didn't actually mean that, no, in relation to the report.
Oh, sorry.
On page 10, that recommendation 1 as amended
Page 10.
is proposed, seconded and voted.
Where is it?
Recommendation 2 as amended.
Let me get it. So I haven't read it yet. Right. Okay.
Has been proposed, seconded and voted on, just so that we're quite clear.
Okay. Thank you. We have agreed to appoint the whole committee as to review this, and we are agreeing the terms of reference as set out in 2.1 as amended. Okay? So is everybody happy with that? Okay, thank you very much. Right, the next item on the agenda is agenda item 12, which is a member development plan 2017-2018. And that recommendation is that the report makes following recommendations to the final decision maker to approve the member development plan for 2017-18, to note the actual spend on member development in 2016 and 17, and to identify any additional training needs that are not currently covered in the member development plan for 2017-2018. I trust everybody's read the notes on that. Can I throw that open? But I'm first of all going to ask Councillor English, who wants to comment on that.
Originally, Mr. Chairman, I only had one comment to make, and that was arose out of a very impassioned and I think very sound speech made to Audit Committee last week by Councillor Prendergast. In relation, which is not entirely unrelated to what we were just discussing, and that was in relation to some of the, shall we say, inappropriate issues that have been raised in correspondence to some members of the council and officers by the council, by some parish councils. So it was discussed at audit, but I think in terms of the member development programme, both for ourselves and in relation to parish councils, there is a need to look at that particular, for want of a word, civility agenda. So that's point one. My second point was I was a little baffled because unless I've got this completely wrong, Mrs Woodhouse referred on the points that were raised relating to the items that were not in the report arising from the last meeting in relation to taking things forward, that you were going to pick that up under item 12 of this agenda. Unless I've completely misunderstood that, I'm not quite sure how those issues relate to the member development programme, because the two things are not completely clear in their relationship. So if you wouldn't mind clarifying that point, because I'm a little unclear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor English. So on your first point with regard to the issue that come up at Audit Governance Standards, as I stated at Audit Governance Standards, we do have equalities training coming up for councillors, and that is on the programme. So on page 21, you've got equality refresh, so that's covered there. With regard to the other item, the matters raised come under when we were discussing the member development plan. So in March, we had a discussion on things that members wanted to see in the development plan and areas they want actioned, which is why I've suggested those points that were raised under that item, if they haven't been addressed in this report, we can deal with them now, and I can either put them in or I can go away and get more information. So that's the reason why I made the link, because they were specifically for the item that's on today, if that's okay.
But I can understand what you're saying, but I just don't understand how the issue relating to, for example, the comment on the previous version of the Constitution and the 6-month rule.
The 6-month rule has already been addressed, so we've spoken about the fact we'll bring a report back to September meeting, so Robin addressed that earlier. The other items I'm talking about are the ones that Councillor Prendergast raised, which is on page 4 of your papers. So there's a series of bullet points, and Councillor Prendergast was making the point that she did not believe that all of those things picked up, and I can identify, for example, the up-to-date staffing structure and contact telephone numbers need to be distributed, and they're being worked on at the moment. But the other things should really be contained within that report, because they do all relate to the item on member development, so specifically page 4.
It was actually, sorry, it was because when you actually referred to it, you actually said page 3. So that was why. Yeah. And, but I would point out that there is an outstanding issue and this is the other. I wasn't going to go into this, but given that it is being handled as part of the member development report, there is an outstanding issue, and members of the Planning Committee spokespersons are still waiting a response from Legal Services on the 4th point of a change to the Constitution, which relates to enforcement, but it does mean that the proposed changes we're going to make to the Constitution in relation to member development can't come forward, because we're still waiting for the 4th point, which relates to enforcement. So we're now 5 months. We're now 5 months into not having had a response from Legal Services on that issue. I wasn't going to bring that up here, but as it's been shoved into the same issue.
Councillor English, can I just clarify? When I said that I would deal with the items Councillor Prendergast was raising, I was specifically referring to those items raised under report about member training. Point 4, could I ask you which page you're referring to? Because I don't believe it is this item, and I don't believe it relates to it.
I will take this up outside the meeting, because there's clearly been a problem, and it hasn't been. If we're going to deal with the issues that you're talking about in that way, I'm going to have to address it directly with Legal Services, because clearly they're not au fait. Neither of you are au fait with what I'm talking about, which I had thought that you would be. So I'm obviously going to have to take it away and
Thank you, Councillor English. Is the committee happy with that suggestion that it goes away, and can you come back to us at a later date? Councillor Prendergast.
I just want to add a few things about Appendix 2, if I may, please, coming right back to the agenda item. I'm curious to know why we had such a serious underspend last year, but we can come back to that in a moment. Appendix 2, I know you've got the planning tour on there. I raised this last year at both SPSD and the Planning Committee. I've been a member of the Planning Committee, a member of this council for, 16 months now, and I'm still waiting for this planning tour, which is supposed to happen at least annually. We haven't seen it. Thank you. Mrs. Woodhouse, I know the chairing skills you did open up to me, at least, but I'm just wondering if going forward, seeing as we do have a little bit of money there, if we could open it up to members more generally in the future, because I think we've got to think ahead and think about succession planning. And, you know, for member development, that's really key, really important. And the only other thing, again, coming back to what Councillor English raised about audit and governance last week and my comments, as we have an underspend and some of the items are at officer time only, perhaps we could include perhaps just the parish clerks if numbers are going to be prohibitive on the equality refresh and the standards element. I think it would be really useful and it would help to avoid some of the issues that I raised last week and that Mrs. Hinder has raised this evening. It's just something for this committee to think about. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. Councillor Hinder.
Thank you. I'm going to support Councillor Prendergast. I think parish councils, it's very important that we give more training to parish councils, especially on standards, the code of conduct. I think it's really important. But my parish council is always saying they want more and more training, and I think more of it should be opened to parish councillors. And can I make another point here? I did the chairing skills. I then did the procedural training, which was virtually identical, and the people that were there felt the same way. It was virtually two trainings, which were advertised differently, which were virtually covered the same thing. And also, when it was mentioned about role-playing, there was a big groan, and nobody really wants it. So can you have another look at that, please? And role-playing, because believe me, councillors don't really want it. So, Angela, please, can we have a good look at this? Because it was a big groan, and the whole of the room was groaned. So, please, could you... I mean, it might be right in its place, but that wasn't right. Okay? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Those points of role play will be noted. Thank you. Councillor Perry.
Thank you. It's just to build on a point that's made by Councillor Hinder on the standards. Parish councils are represented on the Audit and Standards and Governance Committee. Therefore, I think we're duty bound to offer training to parish councils for that reason alone. Maybe via through CALC, I don't know which way you would do it. But I think, you know, they are partners in this. And most parishes, as far as I know, set the same standards. They have the same standards as their Mason Borough Council in terms of the rules and everything. So I think we should invite or allow parish councillors to attend certainly these standards sessions. It's really, really important, I think.
Thanks very much. I totally agree with you, actually. I mean, my own parish councils, do need training, and I suspect throughout the rest of the borough, they're frightened to come forward in some cases because they don't know things. Councillor Firmer.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'd like to echo the thoughts of my of other members regarding parish councils. I have 5 of them, and they are screaming out for more training. I think they would find it very useful. I encourage all of them to go to more planning training and things like that. So the more I think that we can training we can give them, the better. Regarding some points that Councillor Prendergast made earlier on page 4, things that might be included in this training schedule. I'm pleased to see the problem with gangs is on here. I didn't see homelessness, though, so I wonder if that could... Oh, that's being dealt with separately. And the other point was policy changes in central government. I know Mark Green has done some really, really good ones, and so I'd like to say on record that I'm very grateful for him doing those. I think we've all really, really appreciated them, and so the more the better, particularly as minority government's a bit nightmarish for us in local government. No one knows what's going on, so the more clarity he can provide, the better. That'd be good. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lewins.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. I notice you're going to allow about a month's notice, which is great, but I wonder if there's any more notice that you could give if they're already arranged. I don't know whether you do like a diary system where it just comes up in a month, but if it's something that's already been arranged, then maybe we could know sooner, if that's okay. Thank you, Angela.
Councillor Vizard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a point that Councillor Hinder brought up. I don't know how we review this training, but obviously if we are doing training sessions that are overlapping, it would seem sensible that maybe they should... I don't know where we go to review them, to be honest, and I don't want to sort of land too much on Angela's desk, but we probably need to look at some of the training. If some of it does overlap, it should be trimmed down, let's say.
Thank you, Councillor Vizard. Any other comments on that? No? Well, can I go to the agenda item 12 on page 13 and go to the recommendations. One is to approve the member development plan for 2017-2018. Item 2, to note the actual spend on member development in 2016-17 and to identify any additional training needs that are not currently covered in the member development plan for 2017-2018. Is that is that acceptable? Are we all? Can we take a vote on that? Right. Okay. It's agreed. So, a proposal, yeah. Now, who wants to propose it? Councillor Blackmore, thank you. Who's going to second it? Councillor Vizard, I think I had his hand up first. Thank you very much. So that is... Can we take a vote on it? There you go. Done. Unanimous. Thank you. Thank you very much. This buttons, I'm going to have to... Thank you very much, and this concludes this meeting.